Hi, welcome to our daily encounter. Today for our devotion, I'd like to focus on the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes are how the Lord begins his Sermon on the Mount in chapter 5. And these Beatitudes are not given perhaps the import that they ought to receive. And they're also oftentimes not looked at in the context from which they were given. A lot of times we look at the Beatitudes, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, blessed are the gentle, so on and so forth. And we look at those from a Western culture and from a Christian standpoint, and not from a Jewish listener who would have been listening to Jesus speak these words for the first time back in the first century. These words would have been shocking to a Jewish listener in the first century. Think about this for a moment. This is one of the benefits of reading through the entire scriptures from beginning to end, because you see not only just various scriptures in their immediate context, but you get to see the whole flow of scriptures and the whole unfolding of history and how everything is so tied together. Because when we went through the Old Testament, we read about a Messiah that was going to come. Particularly in the book of Daniel, we read about the fact that there were going to be these kingdoms. You'd have Babylon, and then following Babylon, you would have the Persians, the Medes and the Persians, and then you'd have the Greeks, and then you'd have the Romans. And when the Romans came, the rock was going to come out of a mountain, and it was going to come and shatter the feet of the statue, and the whole statue was going to fall down and be destroyed. And this was attributed to the Messiah that was going to come, who was going to come bringing a kingdom, bringing a dominion, one that was going to overtake the world. And so if you're a Jewish person who has heard these scriptures from the time that you're a youth, you're thinking, okay, the Messiah is going to come. Here we are under Roman rule. I can count back on the various kingdoms that we've had that have ruled over the much of the earth, and I can kind of figure out that this is the kingdom from which the Messiah, or to which the Messiah was going to come, or during which the Messiah was going to come. And so here comes Jesus onto the scene. And this man is performing miracles. He's preaching that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Chapter 4, verse 17. He's telling people to repent. Even John the Baptist is testifying to the fact that, this is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And a lot of talk and a lot of attention is given to Jesus, and perhaps a lot are wondering, is this the Messiah? Is this the one who has been prophesied about? Is this going to be the person who's going to bring back Israel to a state of national security, national freedom, the one that's going to overtake our enemies and bring glory to Israel? And so you meet at this mountain, and you want to listen to this Jesus speak, thinking perhaps maybe this is the future king. And he begins to give some teachings about this kingdom that he has been proclaiming. And this is what he says. He says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Okay, so you're thinking back, if you're this Jewish listener in the first century, you're perhaps thinking back of these kingdoms and what you have seen kingdoms do and heard about what kingdoms have done. Even by reading through the Old Testament, reading through the prophets and things, you read about the Assyrian nation that came in and they were ruthless, and they came in and they would take over people, lead them out in a very violent way, and then they would rule for a while, and then came the Babylonians, who were also a violent people who came and destroyed everything that came into their path. And then you just go from kingdom to kingdom and you see nothing but power and dominance and just rule, and everybody's just striving to get on top and try to defeat the other nations. And even at this time there was a lot of there was some political unrest going on in the kingdom, and a lot of it had to do with one people trying to rule over another. And that's your image of a kingdom. It's a kingdom that is spread, that is dominant, based upon power. But here you have this Jesus, who maybe you're thinking could be this king that everyone's been expecting. And he's talking about a kingdom where you're poor in spirit, where you're mourning, where you're gentle. That completely goes against what you would think about with a strong, dominant kingdom. Those who hunger and thirst, those who are merciful, those who are pure in heart, those who are peacemakers. A kingdom is not established, at least not in the mindset at the time, through peacemaking. Again, it's through weapons, it's through dominance, it's through power. But this is the type of kingdom that Jesus is describing. And virtually what he's saying here, basically what he's saying here, is that this is a kingdom unlike any kingdom you've ever heard of before. And this is not a kingdom like what you are expecting. This is a kingdom that is of heaven, not a kingdom that is of earth. And so it's different in its nature. It's different in its focus. And this lays the foundation for the rest of the Sermon on the Mount as you go through the following chapters. And really, you could see this as really the foundation of all of Jesus' teachings and of the whole way of the kingdom life, going all the way through the New Testament. Because what is Jesus focused on here as he talks about these Beatitudes? Well, he's talking about attitudes, dispositions, and conditions of the heart. He's not so much focused upon outward things. The Jews at that time had that down. They tithed mint and cumin. They observed. They were strict observers of the Sabbath. You go down the list. They were very in tune to the outward show. Jesus will touch on that some in chapter 6 about not doing things for outward show. They had that, but what Jesus was saying is the kingdom that I'm bringing is a kingdom that is a matter that is focused upon the heart, and that is there to change hearts. And it's a heart of humility, gentleness, mercy, a heart that recognizes the fact that I am spiritually bankrupt before God. And I recognize the fact that I do not have sufficient righteousness in and of myself, and so I'm hungering and I'm thirsting for righteousness that I know that I cannot achieve on my own. And these are the foundations for how the kingdom would be established and how people would enter into the kingdom. Because how is it that we enter into the kingdom? But by recognizing the fact that we don't have it all together, that we cannot achieve a place before God based upon our own righteousness. This is a kingdom that is not based upon arrogance, about self-assertion, about climbing your way to the top. This is a kingdom that brings you down to your knees. And when it gets you down on your knees, then the Lord reaches down and He lifts you up. That's the type of kingdom that Jesus is establishing here. And this is something that we need to be reminded of as Christians, as citizens of this kingdom. We need to realize, one, what the nature of this kingdom is that we are citizens of, and two, how it is that we are to live being in this kingdom. The nature of the kingdom is not like this world. It's unlike any kingdom that this world has ever known. And it's a kingdom that is lived out through a heart of humility. So practically, what that means for us is that each and every day we walk before the Lord with a humble heart, opening our heart to Him. You know, many people don't feel close to God, and they don't experience the presence of God in their life because they haven't opened up their heart to Him through humility. Opening up their hearts to Him in humility. And many times the people that miss this out the most are the people who perhaps by nature are humble people. Because they might think, well, I'm humble enough based upon my own natural disposition. But this is something that all of us have to do, no matter if you're naturally a humble person or not, to consciously humble yourself before God, to purposely bow your heart within to the Lord and open your heart to the Lord. If you're not willing to do that, or even if you just forget to do that, you're not going to feel that close connection to God that you otherwise could. When Jesus was speaking to the church at Laodicea, this was a church that was very prideful. They thought they had it all together. They said in verse 17 of Revelation 3, because you say, I am rich and have become wealthy and have need of nothing, do you not know that you are wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked? And then he'll go on to say in verse 20, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and will dine with him, and he with me. How is it that they would open their hearts to Him? Well, I would say the very first step was they had to humble themselves, recognize who they were, recognize the fact that they, spiritually speaking, were wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked, and return back to Him in that, with that attitude. You might also remember the book of James, in James chapter 4, when it's talking to the worldly Christian. One of the things that a person must do if they find themselves caught up in worldliness, materialism, things along those lines, is that they must humble themselves. It says in verse 5, or do you think that the scriptures speak to no purpose? He jealously desires the Spirit which He has made to dwell in us, but He gives a greater grace. Therefore it says, God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Submit therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and He will draw near to you. Drawing near to God starts with what? It starts with a humble heart. And so this is something that we all need to practice. No matter if you are naturally an arrogant person or you're naturally a humble person, all of us need to purposely and conscientiously humble ourselves before God, bow our hearts within to Him, open ourselves up to Him, and see how the pathway to the Spirit coming in and making Himself real to us, how it happens. And so if you want to live a more spiritual life, if you want to live a life more closer to the Lord, this is the way to do it. This is the starting point. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and He will exalt you. He will give you grace. So these are just some things wanted to share with you guys. Hopefully they were helpful to you. Hope you guys have a great day today. Love you guys. God bless.